Well, we're back in the Business This Week studio, and it's Whisky this week, pouring those glasses and that wonderful amber liquid that we've got there. And Rob Allanson is in the studio with us. He's the Grant's Global Brand Ambassador. Got a couple of his brands here, and we've got the brand manager for Chivas Regal in South Africa, the man who's been doing the pouring. That's Mandla Holomisa. So Mandla, you've been pouring there, and that's, I must say, one of the things about whiskey is that it always looks so good. I mean, there's some drinks, some spirits don't look good. They're colorless, they look like cold drink, but whiskey has that amber look, and I know there are different kinds of colors of whiskey. So let's bring us in firstly with the pouring and how important that is.
I think the pour of the whiskey generally is most importantly about what it is you're pouring it into. You know, people like crystal glasses, some people like carafes, some people like flutes in this sense. You know, the kind of glass you really drink your whiskey in kind of determines the way you nose it and everything, and the way you taste it and the way it goes down your palate.
No, I don't know if I'm saying something stupid here, but that looks like a wine glass.
Not necessarily. This is what you call it a flute. I think what it is that it's very round at the bottom, which kind of circulates the whiskey, and then it becomes a little bit narrow at top. Gives you an opportunity to really nose it in that sense. So it's quite opportune in terms when it comes to actually tasting whiskey. Drinking whiskey in the other sense in terms of a tumbler is obviously wide.
This reminds me of my uncle on the West Rand who used to say, "Oh, I knows my wine. I knows my wine." But you mean catch the aroma, right?
Yeah.
So now, Rob, can you add to that the importance of the aroma, the swirling? I mean, there's a temperature aspect to this which releases the aroma?
Yeah, I'd say room temperature all the time. I mean, we use these glasses actually in the lab because they focus the nose and they focus the elements of the whiskey right where you need them.
So are you the kind of guys that you can be given a blind nose and a blind taste and be able to pick up which whiskey it is?
Occasionally. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do, particularly blind, because there's so many whiskies out there, and there are so many whiskies that conform to, say, a conventional rule, but then there are so many whiskies that actually break that rule. So you could get, say, for instance, a non-peated whiskey that comes from Islay on the west coast of Scotland, which you'd expect to be peated if you were following the conventional rules. So you can confuse people blind tasting.
Yeah. Alex, are you a whiskey drinker?
Yeah, I am. I do like a wee dram every now and again.
And do you have to say that you drink these ones?
Absolutely. I actually have an interesting question that I've always wondered, Rob. Often people say, I drink an 18 or 21-year-old, and it seems to be sort of popular to drink an older whiskey, and of course they're more expensive and everything. But personally, I like something around the 15-year sort of region. I find that sort of suits my palate most. What do you think about these different ages in terms of whiskies and what's best under different circumstances? With
why is age so important?
Well, I mean, when I do my tastings, and I've been doing these now for nearly more than 10 years now.
Tough job.
It's terrible, but there's a sweet spot I find. I mean, personally, in the maturation. If you look at time and flavour, and then you have the graft. So when the whiskey goes into the cask first, it takes lots and lots of flavour. It takes 100% of its flavour from the wood, and then as it goes on, it starts taking less and less and less. So you get it sort of dropping off. So for me, it's between 5 and 15 years old. That's where there's a real sweet spot of maturation.
What's your view on the aging aspect? Because Chivas Regal, are there particular issues with aging with Chivas Regal?
No, I think what you find in the market today, aged whiskies really, that's where they really get their character. As much as saying from the wood, but because a whiskey does take 12, it does take 18, it does take 25 years. The market is seeing itself unable to churn out these whiskies in time because of the demand. So you see a lot of the market is starting to make a lot of unaged whiskies focused more on the flavor as opposed to the age. Yeah, so that's what you're seeing a lot what's happening a lot with the whiskies today.
So, I mean, you can't rush a 15-year whiskey. It takes 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're saying that the demand is such that there's not enough.
Yeah, there's accountants in companies in places having nervous breakdowns at the moment, trying to do like a 15-year forecast in places like, developing markets, say Africa, India, which are coming on stream and drinking a lot of whiskey.
Well, I think what we have to do is now taste some whiskey. So, is there one glass that you poured? You need to pour us a couple more there. And what is that, the Chivas? Why don't you give us one of yours as well there, and we'll compare them. Now, this is Chivas, right?
Yeah.
And upmarket brands, particularly in global emerging markets, there must be a lot of fashion, a lot of branding driving those consumptions.
No, definitely. A product like whiskey, which is something that you can deem part of luxury goods. I think buying a quality whiskey is quite an expensive thing. So in terms of the market, in terms of the branding, and in terms of the appeal, we really are becoming very aspirational brands. You're talking to a very high level of consumer.
Okay.
So the kind of pull strategy we need to do is show that the lifestyle of the product is something that you essentially want to be part of, you know. And I mean, we have whiskies today costing up to about 1.2 million. I mean, that's crazy.
For one bottle of whiskey?
Yeah, for 1 bottle of whiskey. And that talks to a certain kind of guy, talks to a certain kind of market.
Let's now we're taking the Chivas Regal first, we'll then take the Grants in a moment. I don't know if that's the right order, but that's what we've done. Tell us now how to taste it, and I'll tell you from my time at SA Breweries, one thing I did learn is that female taste buds at the front are sweeter than male taste buds, and that's why they don't like beer. Generally, women don't like beer because it's too bitter. So in terms of taste buds and how to taste the whiskey to maximize it, what should we be doing here?
For me, when I'm taking people through a tasting, I often start by telling them to hold the glass up to the light, and you're looking for the alcohol and the sugar sticking to the side of the glass. It comes down in legs. You get the same in wine. And that gives you an idea of if
so
it
we
takes
see the little streaks of liquid.
Yeah, you see them just slowly dropping down now. If it takes a long time, that it's going to tell you how viscous it's going to be on your palate. So whether it's going to be like water and just whoosh across the palate, or whether it's going to be like olive oil or cream and it fills the actual palate itself. Then I tend to come to the nose, and I tell people each time you smell at least 3, 4, 5 times. In here you have compounds that like being out in the air and they spritz up the glass, and you also have compounds that are really slow, they take their time getting up the glass. So every time you smell, you're getting something different from the whiskey. You're getting deeper and deeper. And then, as we said earlier, the easy part, you open your mouth, you put the whiskey in.
And should one move it to the back of the mouth or touch with the tongue front or what?
I would say that you chew. You actually chew the whiskey around. The whiskey will react with the saliva in your mouth and start opening out more.
Well, let's do that.
Okay.
Cheers. Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. Pleasure. Have you been drinking long?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't often drink whiskey without ice.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And what we're doing now, and I know this is the case, you're drinking it to get the real flavour, because the ice takes away flavour and dilutes it, doesn't it?
Yeah, ice. I mean, if we're in a tasting situation, say competitions or Whiskey Live, I'd always use water, never use ice, because you can regulate the amount of water.
So Chivas Regal, what should we be doing? Should we be adding water? Should we be drinking it on its own?
You know, there's a saying where a lot of people like to ask, what's the best way to drink whiskey? I always say the best way to drink it is the way you actually would like to drink it.
Even with lemonade?
There's some exceptions to the rule.
Because I know people who drink whiskey with lemonade, and I think, why?
I mean, putting a dash of water into the whiskey actually makes the oils react with the water, which actually makes the whiskey expand. And that's where you really get to tap into the flavors of the whiskey in that sense. A lot of people like it with ice and keep it chilled. In terms of when it comes to mixability, whether you want it with appetizer, whether you want it with lemonade, it's not necessarily a bastardization of whiskey.
It sounds like you disapprove, though.
I mean, there's certain whiskeys which I will enjoy with a mixer of sorts. But I just think that it opens up the market to a whole lot of other consumers, especially female consumers. It tends to be a little bit harsh for them in the beginning. But those really get them into the market of whiskey and actually enjoying it.
What percentage is the market male, female?
If I was to give you a possible percentage, I'd probably say 70-30.
70-30? As much as that in terms of female. Alex, how do you like this? I mean, you're supposed to like this, eh?
Yeah, no, very, very good. Which Chivas are we drinking here?
We're having the Chivas Regal Extra. It's one of our new children in the family. I think historically we've always had the 12 and then the 18. And we saw that in the 15-year-old market, in the middle there's a bit of a gap, because essentially what you want to do is have people migrate within the range of your whiskey and help them grow within it. So a step from a 12 to an 18 is possibly a bit too far.
So you're not giving us the cheap stuff, eh?
No, this is really the good stuff.
So Mandla, tell me this, is this a blended whiskey or is this a single?
Yes, it's a blended whiskey.
Okay. So does that mean that you source different whiskies from the region, or are they all whiskies that are made in the sort of Chivas factory as well?
No, you find that with a lot of whiskies is that we source from many different distilleries, whether it's the grain, whether it's the grain whiskey or whether we essentially what we want to do is find the right balance, so we can find from the north to the south to kind of put it together. In terms
I want to talk to you both briefly about the branding, but let's just taste your Grant's one. What should we be thinking and expecting? How do you position this? What should we be looking for?
So this is our basically our flagship whiskey. This is the one that is the third biggest selling blended whiskey in the world. You're going to get a lot of sweetness at the front, and then a big explosion of peat just at the back of the palate, and then that'll settle down into a little bit of spices just across the tongue.
Alex, let's see if that's what happens.
Cheers. Cheers.
I'm always fascinated by the
There
concept.
goes the explosion.
I'm always fascinated by the concept of blended whiskey, because I always wonder how you manage to get the same flavor every time, or do you, or does it differ from time to time?
This is one of the things that, as working as a whiskey journalist for 10 years, you just find, is incredible. Our master blender, a guy called Brian Kinsman, I find a phenomenal man, because day in, day out, that whiskey doesn't change between here, Kuala Lumpur, Glasgow, and it's a lot of whiskey. It's the same with yours, and the way that these guys can basically look at Scotland like a spice cabinet, and if X and Y whiskey's available last week, it might be A, B, and C and Y this week. So they've got to think, oh gosh, right, how do we change this recipe, but keep the end thing exactly the same?
Let's have a brief summary from both of you. First, you, Mandla, the brand. And the brand, it's key. There's a whole lot of aspirational stuff going on. It's upmarket. Give us a summary there of your brand proposition.
No, in terms of Chivas Regal, it's a classic whiskey. I think it's a brand that resonates with a lot of people from Asia, from Africa, from the United States. What it's always had, its heritage steeped in, is living with chivalry. I think chivalry has moved.
Which is your tagline, isn't it?
Yeah. We've moved away. Chivalry isn't necessarily pulling out chairs or opening doors. Living with chivalry is actually having a balance between living a life and having that balance between style and substance. And I think that's essentially the kind of man that we want drinking this whiskey. And that's essentially the way people in life need to.
And of course, we know how it works. If you drink this whiskey, you will be like that. It's magic, isn't it?
Of course.
What's your brand proposition?
We're a family-owned company. We have been for 5 generations now. So our proposition's slightly different. We believe that whiskey and success is best shared. So our sort of tagline is, if you've got this far in life and you've nobody to thank, how far have you really got? Which is the hashtag Stand Together. So that's what we believe in, sharing our whiskey. So it's a slightly different proposition, but they all play to the same heartstrings really. And it's going out, it's having your mates around, solving the world's problems over a decent bottle of whiskey.
Right, well, we'll have to stop there. Well, perhaps we won't, but we certainly have to pause this conversation. Thanks to Mandla Holomisa, who's the brand manager for Chivas Regal, Live with Chivalry, and Rob Allanson, the global brand ambassador for Grant, who wants to share his whiskey, and they've been doing that with us tonight. Thank you, gentlemen.